Veteran cried at his son's grave, but the bull knew what to do. Rain from the night before still clung to the grass, soaking the knees of Sergeant Victor Hale's faded jeans as he knelt in front of his son's grave. His hand, calloused and trembling, pressed against the cold stone etched with the name Private Eli Hale, 1998 to 2024. He stared at it like it might change. But it never did. Just words carved into granite. A clean, polished lie that said nothing about the way his boy died. Victor's throat clenched, but he didn't hold it back this time. His head dropped low, shoulders curled forward, and a rough sound escaped his chest, half sob, half groan. It wasn't just grief. It was helplessness. It was guilt. Eli hadn't died on a battlefield. There had been no gunfire exchange, no sacrifice that could be dressed in honor. It had been a misfire, a drill, a mistake. One careless moment during a training exercise at Fort Grayson. 1 second he was sending his son off to serve, the next he was standing in dress blues, accepting a folded flag while his ears rang from the silence of what should have been said. Behind him, not 20 yards away, stood a bull, a massive, broad-shouldered creature with a scarred flank and a coat the color of ash. Revenant, Eli's bull. Raised from a calf, bottle-fed in the early months, trained for show circuits, parades, and competitions. They were inseparable. Some joked the bull listened better than Eli ever did in school. Now Revenant stood still behind the cemetery's back fence, framed by the bare-limbed oak trees that lined the Hale property. The bull's dark eyes were fixed on Victor, not the grave, not the land, just him. And then Revenant let out a sound, a long, low, aching bellow that broke the stillness like thunder rumbling across a valley. Victor's spine stiffened. He didn't look up right away. He didn't need to. That sound said more than words could. It wasn't rage. It wasn't warning. It was mourning, deep and buried and raw. Victor stayed by the grave long after the sun rose over the ridgeline. His hand remained on the stone, fingers tracing the grooves of Eli's name like they might bring him back. The dew soaked through his sleeves. His breath came out in fogged bursts. He didn't move until his back began to ache and the cemetery shadows grew shorter. He finally stood, wiped his hand over his face, and turned toward the fence. Revenant hadn't moved. For a long moment they stared at each other, man and beast, two broken pieces of the same boy. Back at the ranch, Victor moved through the barn in a fog. He fed the cattle, checked the hay bales, swept the stalls like muscle memory. But his eyes kept drifting back to the empty stall at the far end, the one with a wooden plaque over it that read, Revenant. The bull hadn't stepped inside it since Eli's funeral. He stayed out in the eastern pasture by choice, away from the others, like he didn't trust the world anymore. No one blamed him. Neither did Victor. The ranch hands, all good men, had tried to handle Revenant in the months after the funeral. One of them, Bryce, a young fellow with more courage than sense, nearly lost his arm trying to lead him with a halter. Another tried luring him with grain and apples. Revenant had nearly trampled the fence. They stopped trying after that. Talk started. "He's too dangerous," one said. "What if he hurts someone?" another asked. One even suggested putting him down. Victor didn't raise his voice often, but when that was said, he'd slammed his fist on the table so hard the coffee mugs rattled. "He's not dangerous," Victor had growled. "He's not angry. He's mourning." And so Revenant stayed out there. Alone. Mornings became routine. Victor would sit on the porch with a thermos full of bitter black coffee, watching the pasture, listening to the silence. That's when he noticed the pattern. Every morning, just after first light, Revenant would wander to the cemetery fence. He'd stop, just stand there, looking at Eli's grave. Never made a sound, never moved until the sun cleared the trees. Then he'd walk back to the pasture like clockwork. Tea first, Victor thought it was coincidence. Then, habit. But it kept happening. Day after day, same time, same place, like Revenant had memorized it. Or maybe, like he understood. It wore on Victor, that kind of loyalty, that kind of grief. It forced him to confront things he wasn't ready to face. One evening, with the sun bleeding into the hills, Victor walked out to the grave again. He didn't tell anyone, didn't bring anything, just himself. The wind had quieted. The sky was streaked with violet. He knelt, hand resting again on Eli's stone, eyes closed. And then, hoofbeats. Slow, heavy. He turned. Revenant was there. Not pacing, not snorting, just walking, one step at a time across the field. He crossed the fence line, no hesitation. He came to the grave and, without a sound, folded his legs beneath him and laid down beside it. Right beside Victor. Victor didn't know how long they sat there. Minutes. Hours. The wind moved around them. The last birds of evening cried out in the trees. But neither of them moved. That night, something shifted. The next day, Revenant was different. Still quiet, still solitary, but not distant. When Victor carried tools into the field, Revenant followed. When a storm blew in and knocked over a feed cart, Revenant dragged it upright with his horns. When coyotes circled the fence one night, Revenant stood between them and the calves, not backing down until Victor ran out with the shotgun. It was like the bull had stepped into a role, not just protector, but partner. Then came the strangest night of all. One of the calves, newborn, still skittish, slipped through a break in the lower gate and ran into the woods. Victor grabbed his lantern and followed the tracks. He expected the worst. But before he could call for help, the sound of crashing branches came from the tree line, and Revenant emerged, nudging the frightened calf back toward the pen, his nose covered in bramble. Bulls didn't do that, not ever. Word got around. Revenant wasn't just a mourning bull. He was something else now. It might have ended there. Quiet healing, a man and a bull carrying grief together. But peace doesn't last forever. One afternoon, Victor made a run into town to pick up feed and supplies. The feed store was half empty, as usual, and the men leaned by the counter with coffee and worn-out stories. Victor kept to himself. But then he overheard something that stopped him cold. "Y'all hear about that fella from Massac?" said a man in a brown vest, laughing. "Coming through these counties, buying up old livestock real cheap. Wants to build some arena. Blood sport stuff. Real nasty." "Yeah, I heard," another replied, tossing a peanut in the air. "Said he's looking for a rogue bull, one with fight. Someone told him there's one out near the Hale place. Wild thing, can't be handled. Gonna make a real showpiece out of him." Victor stood frozen near the sack of molasses cubes, jaw tight, breath thin. The image hit him in a flash. Revenant chained in a pit, forced to fight until his body gave out. He knew the kind of men who ran those operations. He'd seen it overseas, disguised under different names. And he knew one thing for sure. Someone had tipped them off. Someone local. Someone who knew Revenant wasn't just a wild bull anymore. He paid for his feed in silence, walked out to his truck, and sat behind the wheel staring at the horizon. His hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The war had taken many things from him. The uniform, the mission, the future he'd imagined for his son. But it would not take this bull, not this last living piece of Eli. He turned the key, eyes dark with purpose, and drove home fast. He had one thought the whole way back. They're not taking him, not while I'm still breathing. That was Revenant they were talking about, and someone must have tipped them off. The truck appeared without warning. No headlights, no engine growl until it was too close. Victor spotted it from the shadows beside the barn, his shotgun resting across his lap. His pulse quickened. The vehicle was old, paint faded to a pale gray, the kind of truck someone wouldn't report missing because it was already forgotten by the world. It rolled to a quiet stop just outside the ranch's lower fence, tires crunching softly against the gravel. Victor squinted through the night haze, watching the passenger door crack open. Two figures stepped out, both male, both dressed in dark, heavy coats. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their movements were swift and confident, practiced. They climbed the fence in seconds, moving with a kind of quiet precision that told Victor exactly what he was dealing with. Professionals, not some thrill-seeking teenagers or local thieves. These were men who had done this before. Revenant stood in the center of the pen, still as stone. His eyes glinted under the moonlight, unblinking. Victor's breath caught. The bull didn't move, didn't charge, didn't run. It was almost like he was waiting. The intruders advanced slowly, one holding what looked like a tranquilizer gun. The other carried a coiled rope. Step by step, they approached the animal. Victor's hand tensed on the shotgun. He could feel the weight of the steel in his lap, the cold sting of sweat beating at the back of his neck. When the first man raised the tranquilizer rifle, Victor didn't hesitate. He stood, aimed toward the sky, and fired. The blast shattered the silence. Birds shot from the trees. The bull jerked his head, letting out a deep snort. The two men froze, their cover blown. "Run!" one of them hissed. They dropped the rope and bolted back over the fence. The white truck engine revved, tires spinning in the gravel as they peeled off into the darkness, red taillights vanishing into the trees beyond the ridge. Victor didn't chase them. He stood there, smoke trailing from the barrel of his gun, heart thudding in his chest. Revenant turned his massive head toward him and gave a single low grunt, almost like approval. The next morning, Sheriff Miles Garrison arrived in his county truck. He was a tall man with a limp in his left leg and a permanent furrow between his brows. He stepped out slowly, squinting at the field where the incident took place. "You sure you didn't recognize them?" Garrison asked, notepad in hand as he jotted down details. "Didn't get a clear look," Victor replied, wiping his forehead with the back of his sleeve. "They moved like they knew what they were doing. Had a tranquilizer gun, rope. They weren't guessing. They came for him." Garrison scratched his chin. "You can't protect that bull every night, Vic," he said. "These guys are pros. They'll come back smarter next time." Victor's jaw tightened. "I failed to protect my son. I'm not failing what's left of him." The sheriff lowered his gaze, nodding slowly. He knew better than to argue. "Just be careful. These men won't stop because you scared them. They'll get braver, bolder." Victor watched as Garrison drove off, dust kicking up behind the wheels. He turned back to Revenant, who was already pacing the fence line, shoulders tense, nostrils flared. It was like he'd heard every word. That night, and the night after, Victor stayed up with Revenant. No more waiting behind the barn. He sat right at the edge of the corral, shotgun across his knees, eyes scanning the tree line. But nothing happened. By the fourth day, Victor noticed something different. Revenant had begun patrolling the pasture at dusk, not wandering, patrolling, purposeful strides from one end to the other, ears high, movements sharp. During the day, the bull stayed unusually quiet, eyes flicking toward every noise. He wasn't just alert, he was prepared. Then came the morning that chilled Victor to the bone. The sun was just rising when he walked to Eli's grave, as he often did. But this time, something was off. A glint in the grass caught his eye. He knelt, brushed aside the dew, and found it. A single military dog tag, worn, scratched, and streaked with dried mud. Not Eli's. The name etched into the metal was faint but unmistakable. Turner W. Dobb, 137th Brigade. Victor's stomach twisted. He hadn't seen or heard that name in over a decade. Turner had served in his unit during his last deployment. Good soldier, smart, sharp, but unstable. After discharge, rumors spread about his disappearance. Some said he was dead. Others whispered he'd gone underground. Victor didn't believe in coincidence. That tag hadn't blown in from nowhere. He drove into the hills toward a place he hadn't visited in years, an old veterans camp tucked between two ridges beyond Pine Creek. The men there lived quiet, secluded lives. No phones, no questions, just worn-out uniforms and memories they didn't speak of. Frank Belden was sitting on a bench outside the mess cabin when Victor arrived. The old soldier's beard had gone fully gray, but his eyes were still sharp beneath the brim of his cap. "Well, I'll be," Frank muttered as Victor approached. "Ain't seen you since the funeral." Victor held up the dog tag without a word. Frank took it, squinted, then sighed through his teeth. "Turner Dobb," he said quietly. "I was afraid of this." "So he's alive," Victor said, his voice hardening. Frank nodded. "Faked his death. Maybe 5, 6 years ago. Got deep into something dark. Started a group, ex-military, most of them. Underground circuit, animal fights, high-stakes betting, training rings. They break wild animals, turn them into fighters. I've heard rumors for years. Dogs, bulls, even bears. Folks pay thousands to watch." Victor's breath caught. "He's targeting Revenant." Frank's gaze didn't flinch. "Wouldn't surprise me. That bull's got fire, muscle, intelligence, rare combo. And Turner, he doesn't pick random animals. He scouts them." Victor stared at the ground, thoughts racing. If Turner had been here, if he'd left this tag on purpose, it was more than a message. It was a threat. They mark animals, Frank continued, lowering his voice. Scent tags, oil-soaked bones, sometimes hidden under feeders or water troughs, makes the animal easier to track. They come back later when it's dark. Victor clenched his fists. Then I've got work to do. He returned to the ranch before nightfall. The air felt thicker now, like the land itself was holding its breath. Victor grabbed gloves, a flashlight, and a long-handled rake. Revenant followed him step for step, as if he knew the search mattered. They checked the feeding troughs first. Nothing. The barn floor. Clear. Victor moved toward the far end of the pasture, where Eli used to feed Revenant by hand in the evenings, a place no one had touched in months. There it was. Nailed to the underside of the old wooden water trough, barely visible, hung a small piece of bone, white and splintered. It reeked of something foul, like synthetic musk and decay. Victor didn't touch it with his bare hands. He used a handkerchief to pull it free and dropped it into a sealed bag. Revenant snorted behind him, stomping once, like he recognized the scent. Victor stood, face pale, eyes stormy. He marched back to the house and picked up the phone. It rang twice before Garrison answered. "They've already marked him," Victor said, voice tight. "We're out of time." Just before midnight, the soft crunch of tires rolling over gravel cut through the stillness like a whisper through glass. The old Ford crept down the dirt path leading to the Hale Ranch, its headlights off, its engine nearly idling. The moon was high, casting a pale sheen over the pasture. Victor crouched behind the barn, hidden in the shadows, shotgun gripped in both hands. Beside him, Sheriff Garrison adjusted his radio to silent and kept his hand resting lightly over his holstered sidearm. Both men breathed slowly, listening. The trap was set. Revenant stood alone in the corral beneath the moonlight, a hulking silhouette against the fence line. His posture was oddly calm, too calm. His head was slightly lowered, muscles still. He didn't pace, didn't paw the ground. To any outsider, he looked like a tired old bull, docile, spent, and vulnerable. That was the bait. 3 days earlier, Victor and Garrison had drafted the listing together. Posed under a fake name and fake phone number, they posted on every back-channel veterinary forum and livestock resale board they could find. Aging bull for free, too wild to manage. Owner can't keep him. First come, first serve. The wording was intentional. Victor made sure it hinted at desperation, at a man willing to let go of a prized animal for nothing. And it worked. The Ford came to a slow stop at the edge of the pasture. 2 men stepped out. Both were dressed in black, wearing ball caps pulled low, gloves on their hands. Victor recognized the build of the one on the left. It was the same man who had nearly fired the tranquilizer gun 4 nights ago. They moved quickly, ducking under the corral gate rather than climbing, whispering. Their flashlights remained off. Victor held his breath, his pulse thudding in his ears. The men crept forward, inching toward Revenant. One uncoiled a thick rope while the other reached into a black case and drew out what looked like another tranquilizer dart. Revenant didn't flinch. He stood there, head lowered, watching with those cold, intelligent eyes, as if waiting. Just as the man raised the dart gun, Revenant let out a sudden guttural roar, a sound so raw it seemed to shake the ground. The corral exploded with motion. Revenant charged. His hooves slammed the earth, horns gleaming in the moonlight. The first man barely had time to lift the gun before the bull struck the gatepost, shattering wood and sending him flying backwards through the air. He hit the dirt with a heavy thud and didn't move. The second man turned to run, but Garrison was already moving. The sheriff lunged forward from the shadows, catching the fleeing man around the waist and dragging him down in a swirl of dust and gravel. The man fought back, grunting and twisting, but Garrison pinned him with practiced ease, slapping cuffs around his wrists with a quick, practiced motion. Victor stepped out from behind the barn, raising his shotgun, scanning for a third. Then the sound came, a low, deliberate clap. "Nicely done," a voice said, smooth and calm, as a man emerged from the shadows behind the truck. He wore a dark jacket zipped up to his neck and a pistol drawn in one hand. "Didn't think you'd sniff us out, Hale," the man said, stepping forward. His face was older than Victor remembered, but the voice hadn't changed. Cold, precise. Turner Dobb. Victor raised his shotgun, squinting past the moonlight. His shoulder tensed. Should have known you'd show up yourself. Turner smiled faintly, aiming the pistol at Victor's chest. You should have let the bull go. Would have been easier. Victor didn't blink. His voice came quiet and steady. I let my son go, he said, tightening his grip on the shotgun. I'm not letting him go too. Turner's finger twitched. The pistol cracked. Victor stumbled back, the shotgun falling from his hands as the bullet struck his left shoulder. Pain roared through his body. He hit the ground hard, vision blurring. Then Revenant bellowed again and charged. Turner turned too late. The bull struck him with full force, horns slamming into his side and lifting him off the ground. Turner let out a sharp cry as his body arced through the air and hit the dirt with a sickening crunch. His pistol flew from his hand, skidding into the dust. Revenant didn't back off. He stood over Victor now, head lowered, chest heaving, his shoulders streaked with blood from a shallow cut along his neck. But his eyes never left Turner, who groaned and clutched his ribs. Garrison rushed to Victor's side, radioing for backup. We need an ambulance at the Hale Ranch. Gunshot wound, suspect down, he barked into the mic. Victor, barely conscious, looked up at the towering shape of Revenant standing guard. Good boy, he whispered through clenched teeth. By the time backup arrived, lights lit up the pasture like a crime scene. Turner was cuffed, bloodied, but alive. The man Revenant had flung into the gatepost was conscious, moaning in pain, and being loaded onto a stretcher. The third was already in custody. Garrison gave a full statement to arriving deputies while paramedics treated Victor beside the corral. Revenant didn't move. He stood at Victor's side, calm now, watching everything, like a soldier standing post. Before dawn, the media had gotten wind of it. A story this wild didn't stay quiet long. Headlines spread fast. Retired sergeant and bull stop criminal ring. Illegal animal fighting syndicate busted in midnight sting. Photos of Revenant standing protectively in the corral were already circulating online, but that wasn't the only call Victor received that morning. As he sat inside his house, his shoulder freshly bandaged and his arm in a sling, the landline rang. Garrison answered for him, nodding once, then passed it to Victor. It's Fort Grayson, he said quietly. Victor's mouth went dry as he pressed the phone to his ear. A calm voice on the other end introduced himself as Lieutenant Colonel Rusk, lead investigator for internal affairs. Mr. Hale, the voice said, I'm calling to inform you that due to newly uncovered evidence, the investigation into your son's death has been reopened. Victor sat up straighter. His heart slowed, then hammered again. The colonel continued. We have confirmed that Turner Dobb was working as a civilian contractor on site during the time of your son's training. Documents show he had access to equipment and ranges that were involved in the incident. There are discrepancies in the chain of command logs, and testimonies that were previously withheld have now been submitted. Victor gripped the receiver tightly. I can't speak to the final conclusion yet, Rusk said, but it's clear your son's death may not have been an accident. We're pursuing it fully. Victor didn't speak at first. His throat felt too tight, the ache in his shoulder, the ringing in his ears. It all faded beneath the weight of that sentence. Eli had tried to warn someone. Victor remembered now how his son once mentioned seeing strange figures at the edge of the training grounds, how his last call home had been cut short. Dad, there's something I don't like here, he'd started to say, but the line had dropped and Victor had brushed it off. He closed his eyes, jaw clenched. It hadn't been an accident. Turner Dobb had been connected from the start. First Eli, then Revenant. This wasn't over, but something had shifted. Justice, long buried in silence, had started to breathe again. Turner Dobb had once worked as a civilian contractor during training operations, and new evidence showed Eli's death may not have been an accident. The sound of construction had faded. The paint had dried. The fences had been reinforced not to hold in livestock, but to welcome something else. Healing. Where once the pastures held cattle and isolation, now they held something new. Rows of wooden benches overlooked a broad open field. At the far edge stood a long shelter with a clean sign overhead, the Hale Reserve. Beneath it, in smaller letters carved carefully into cedar, for Eli. Victor stood beneath the late summer sky, his arm finally out of the sling, though he still moved stiffly on certain mornings. The bullet wound had healed, but the ache reminded him of everything that had brought them to this moment. He watched as a group of boys, some quiet, some laughing nervously, lined up beside a low wooden gate, each holding a brush or a pale apple in hand. Most of them were children of soldiers who never came back. Some were boys whose fathers had come back changed, quiet, angry, unreachable. Others had simply been lost in the chaos of what war leaves behind. Revenant stood at the far side of the pen, his great frame casting a long shadow over the dry earth. He had grown calmer since the night of the attack, slower in his steps. But something in his eyes had deepened. Not just grief, not just memory, understanding. A boy, no older than 12, lingered behind the others. His name was Micah. He'd barely spoken a word since he arrived with his grandfather 2 days ago. The man had served in the Gulf, and Micah's father had died in a transport accident overseas. Victor had watched the boy for days, alone by the fence, tracing circles in the dirt with the toe of his boot. Today, though, Micah stood a little closer. Victor walked over to him, speaking gently. "You want to try brushing him?" Micah looked up, his brown eyes uncertain. "Will he let me?" Victor glanced toward Revenant, who had begun walking slowly toward the gate. "More than most people ever will," he said softly. Micah stepped forward. The brush trembled slightly in his small hand, but he didn't turn back. Revenant reached the gate and stopped, his head lowering until it was level with the boy's chest. There was no sound except the soft wind brushing through the open field. Then Micah lifted the brush and touched it to Revenant's side. The bull didn't flinch. Slow strokes. Gentle movements. A quiet connection forming, one Victor had seen only a few times in his life. The other children grew silent, watching. Even the veterans sitting on the benches took notice, their conversations fading as the boy moved beside the animal with a sense of calm that hadn't been there moments before. In the weeks after Turner Dobbs' arrest, everything had moved quickly. The trial had been swift, evidence stacked higher than anyone expected. Turner had left behind digital records, notes, even private logs of bets and training sessions for the illegal ring he operated. But the most damning evidence came from Victor's own testimony. He stood before the court in a dark gray suit, arms still braced beneath a jacket, and spoke clearly into the microphone. "My son, Eli Hale, saw something he wasn't supposed to. He tried to report it, and for that, his weapon was tampered with during a live drill." His voice didn't shake. "He died trying to do the right thing." More evidence confirmed it. Eli's original training partner, Specialist Renner, admitted under pressure that Turner had been seen tampering with weapons on the range the night before the accident. For years, he'd stayed silent, fearing for his life. Now, with Turner caught, the truth had been set free. The military court ruled in Eli's favor posthumously. His record was cleared, and he was awarded the Silver Arrow for integrity in the line of duty. Victor received the citation himself, standing tall as officers saluted not him, but the boy who had once brushed a bull in the morning light and believed in doing what was right. But Victor didn't return to the ranch to hang medals. He returned to build something more permanent. The sanctuary hadn't been part of any long-term plan. It began with one letter, sent from a former Marine whose son had developed violent tendencies after losing his uncle in combat. He asked if his boy could spend time at the ranch with Revenant. Victor agreed, thinking little of it. Then came another, and another. Within a month, he had over 24 inquiries. He cleared out the old feed barn and replaced it with a meditation space, built simple benches around the field, invited veterans and counselors to volunteer, no ads, no commercials, just word of mouth. Revenant had never been trained as a therapy animal, but he didn't need training. Boys who couldn't speak to anyone else stood silently beside him. Soldiers with haunted eyes brushed his flanks and said nothing, and walked away steadier. The bull's presence, immense and unwavering, gave space for people to exist without judgment. And Victor healed too. His mornings no longer started in silence but in quiet motion, watching young hands fill water troughs, hearing men talk again, sometimes about nothing at all. Some days he worked the fence line, other days he just sat by Eli's grave and listened to the wind. That morning he found himself there again. The marker was simple, white stone, no medals carved into it, no dates of rank, just Eli Hale, son, brave without witness. Victor stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, the warm wind brushing across his weathered face. He looked down at the stone and nodded once. "I kept him safe," he whispered. Behind him, the soft thud of hooves approached. Revenant stopped beside him, close enough that their shadows overlapped. The bull made no sound. He just stood there, head slightly bowed, eyes forward. They stayed like that for a while, neither man nor beast needing to speak. Back at the pen, Micah had joined the others now. He walked more confidently, passing the brush to another boy. Victor watched from the fence line, arms folded. The image struck him hard, not because it reminded him of Eli, but because it didn't. It was new. It was the future. Garrison stopped by that afternoon, leaning against his cruiser with a mug of coffee in one hand. "Place looks different," he said, watching the boys work. "Feels different." Victor nodded. "It's starting to mean something." "Any regrets?" the sheriff asked. Victor looked at Revenant, who was letting two boys tie a blue ribbon around one of his horns. The bull didn't budge. "Not anymore," Victor said. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting gold across the hills, a final moment settled in like the closing of a chapter. A young boy, about the same age Eli had been when he first took to the field, stood at the gate. He was quiet, uncertain, wide-eyed. He turned to Victor and asked, "Does he understand us?" Victor smiled, handed him a clean brush, and nodded toward the pen. "More than most people ever will." And as the boy stepped forward, Revenant lowered his head, as if welcoming him into the bond only a few could ever share.